New York Ranger fans are mad at Mika Zibanejad after what was arguably his worst season with the team. Today we are discussing the likelihood of a bounce-back campaign for Mika.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1357 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So today we continue our fun-filled offseason series. We've done this every offseason since the inception of Locked On New York Rangers. In fact, basically just taking a look at every single player on the New York Ranger roster, or at least the guys that we project to make the opening night roster, and talk about everything that could go right this season and everything that could go wrong this season for any certain player. And today it just so happens to be Mika Zibanejad, who, for my money, is one of the more interesting players when it comes to this exercise, because we've seen a lot of good with Mika Zibanejad as a Ranger. We've seen a lot of bad with Mika Zibanejad as a Ranger. The bad is more so in recent history, but there's at least some reasons to believe that a bounce back, or a semi-bounce back at the very least, could at least be possible. So we'll see. We'll examine it from top to bottom, left to right, every which way. But we're going to do what we always do, and we're going to start this episode with the worst case scenarios. We'll end on the good stuff, and at the very end of today's episode, we'll have kind of like a final verdict, player outlook for Mika Zibanejad for this upcoming season and what we should all be expecting of him. A couple of predictions mixed in there as well. But again, let's begin with the worst case scenarios for Mika Zibanejad. Everything that could possibly go wrong. So for starters, this one was a no-brainer. Absolutely had to begin with this. Another slow start to the season for Mika Zibanejad. This was beyond obvious as far as where we should start with the worst-case scenarios for Mika. And the interesting thing here is that, honestly, even in seasons where Mika Zibanejad played very well for the Rangers, and there have been seasons where he has indeed done that, you look at his numbers, you look at like the game logs, and it does feel like most of his seasons are backloaded. I'm not going to say that he's never done anything in the first couple months of the season, but for the most part, Mika Zibanejad has been a slow starter, and then he seems to pick it up and get going the longer that the season goes. The one season I remember, we gave him a little bit of a break because, he was believed to be suffering from, some form of long COVID or whatever it was at that time. But this past season, what we saw from Mika Zibanejad at the start of the year was absolutely unacceptable. It's not so much that he wasn't producing offensively, because that's obvious. I mean, you can look back at the stats and figure that out for yourself. But you guys know just as well as I do. Anybody that watched this Ranger team this past season, you guys know that something was very, very amiss when it came to Mika Zibanejad. You just watch the way that he played. It's not just that he wasn't scoring, all kinds of turnovers, bad defensive play, seemingly gassed, during shifts and whatnot. And just this kind of overall like vibe or energy coming from Mika, where it felt like this guy would rather be anywhere else on the planet right now than playing hockey for the New York Rangers and being paid very handsomely to do so, I might add. So it wasn't good. I mean, you look at November and December. There was a 5-game stretch in November where he had 1 assist. There was an 8-game stretch in December where he had no points whatsoever. And granted, he was not the only Ranger struggling immensely, but this is supposed to be one of the guys. I mean, this is one of your leaders, and this is somebody that, after Panarin, I mean, you're counting on offense from Mika as much or more than any other player on this roster. So it was just very disheartening to see that. And obviously the Rangers play suffered, at least in part due to Mika's shaky play at the start of the season. As far as how to correct this, how to fix this, I mean, I do have a couple of ideas where we get to that in the best case scenarios. I don't think there's any like magic formula here, though. I don't have like a magic wand that I can wave and make Mika play better in October and in November and in December, make him play as well early in the season as he tends to play, later in the season. The only things that I can really throw out there is maybe just trying to do something different this offseason, which hopefully is already underway for Mika Zibanejad, in terms of how he gets ready for the upcoming season. And whether that's more skating, whether that's more time in the weight room, whatever it might be, something that you have to adjust either from a mental or physical standpoint. Mika's got to try something different, if for no other reason than just for the sake of trying something different. Because when you look at recent seasons with the Rangers, he does tend to stumble out of the starting blocks. So, okay, man, whatever you're doing, it's not really working all that great. So let's try something a little bit different, and let's see if we can get you going. And for once, Mika Zibanejad can finally hit the ground running. And this is a season where the Rangers need that to happen, because everything last year, the vibes are so terrible. This team desperately needs a good start to the season, and Mika has to have a hand in that if it is to, come to fruition. I think in another worst case scenario, you could have a situation where the Rangers' center depth suffers due to the need of having to play Mika Zibanejad with JT Miller. And when you look at the Rangers centers, at least on paper, in theory, that should be one of the strengths of the team, right? You got Vincent Trocheck, you got JT Miller, you've got Mika Zibanejad. That's good. Those guys have had really nice careers for themselves. They've all been all-stars and point-per-game players and the whole 9 yards. But what I'm hoping the Rangers do this season is put Mika with JT Miller. We're going to have more on that a little bit later in today's episode. And I'll explain the reasons, why that should be the case. But the one downside to doing that, it's a pretty significant downside, because if you take Mika and you put him with JT Miller, okay, now who centers the third line? Because that would obviously mean that JT Miller and Vincent Trocheck will be centering the first and second lines in one order or the other. And that would mean there's really no one left to center the third line. I mean, there's options. You've got some in-house options. You could go with Juuso Parston, or you go with Johnny Brodzinski. But it's just a situation where if you have to cater to Mika's needs, where he has to play with JT Miller if we get anything positive out of him, then you do leave a little bit of a hole there on third line center. And that's no disrespect to Juuso Parston, no disrespect to Johnny Brodzinski. I like Brodzinski. Honestly, if the Rangers were to do this, I think it's time for Brodzinski to finally get some run as a third line center. I know some people are going to be skeptical about that, but Brodzinski is one of those guys last season that continued to play hard, continued to show some heart. I thought at least went out there and gave you an honest effort every single night, and that should be a given, but that's more than I can say for a lot of players on this New York Ranger team. So I wouldn't mind Brodzinski getting a shot at that role, third line center next year. But, if you have to adjust, if you're in a situation where Brodzinski's not giving you enough at third line center, and if Parsons not giving you enough at third line center, and there's no one else to go to, then what do? I mean, you would have to separate Mika and JT Miller. So I wouldn't want there to be a massive hole in the lineup just because, okay, we have to, play to Mika Zibanejad's strengths, and the $8.5 million center just has to be with JT Miller for him to do anything productive. So again, I favor JT and Mika together to start the season, but I also recognize there could be some drawbacks to it as well. And we'll see how everything shakes out there. In best case scenario, Brodzinski or Parsons steps up and they don't have to separate Mika and JT Miller. But in a worst case scenario, here's another one. The Rangers this upcoming season once again suffer from a lack of leadership. And in all fairness, we did an episode on Artemi Panarin. That was the first in this series of best and worst case scenarios for the Rangers for this upcoming season. And I should have mentioned it with Panarin too, because he, like Mika, is one of the guys that are wearing the A on their sweaters, right? It's those two and it's Adam Fox. That's all that's left as far as guys who wear letters. We'll see if they name a captain before the start of the season. But this team had no leaders last year. No leadership. Nobody stepping up in any meaningful way on the ice, seemingly off the ice either. And guys just kind of went through the motions until somebody told them they lost, and then they all went home. And that was basically how last season went. And when that's the case, it has to fall at least somewhat on the guys that are wearing letters. Where is Mika stepping up in the leadership role? Or Kreider, who was still here last year? Or Adam Fox? Or Artemi Panarin? And if that happens again this season, if it's another one of those situations where guys are just kind of out there and they're just kind of doing whatever, and if we win, we win, and if we don't, we don't, then that falls on the leaders. And it will again fall on the Ranger leaders and the guys wearing the letters, Mika Zibanejad included. I think it also speaks volumes about where the Ranger leadership is when you consider the fact that the three alternate captains that remain, I don't think really anybody wants him to be the captain. There's a couple people that might pull for Adam Fox a little bit to be the next New York Ranger captain. I'd rather it be Miller or Trocheck. Fox has a little bit of support, but nobody wants Panarin to be the next captain. He's only got 1 year left on his contract, so that's somewhat understandable. Nobody wants Mika to be the next captain either, though, and I think that says a lot. And Mika needs to step up. He's not going to be the next captain, but he's got to step up as one of the veteran leaders of this team, and now the longest tenured member of the New York Rangers, now that Chris Kreider has been traded to Anaheim. But in a worst-case scenario, this team, again, suffers from a lack of leadership, and if that is the case, then at least some of that certainly has to fall on, again, the longest tenured Ranger, the veteran of this team, somebody who's supposed to be a leader, and that would, of course, be Mika Zibanejad. I think also in a worst-case scenario, you have a situation where the Ranger fans basically turn against Mika Zibanejad. Like really, really turn against Mika Zibanejad. There was a situation last year where there was a little bit of booing toward Mika Zibanejad. It wasn't one of those situations where it's like every time he touches the puck, everybody in the Garden just boos him unmercifully. But he was really struggling early in the season, Mika. He tried one of those one-timers that just were not working in the slightest at the beginning of last season, and he shanked it. And there was this little smattering of boos that came out of the Garden crowd. Now, I don't know if they were directed like directly at Mika or the fans were just fed up with how the team was playing, a little bit of both maybe. But if Mika comes out this season and plays at the start of this season the way he played at the start of last season, and when people know how much longer he's still here and how much money he's making and all this stuff, and he's got the full no move clause, which prevents the Rangers from moving Mika Zibanejad to another team, he might start hearing it from Ranger fans. And I'm not advocating for that. I'm not typically a big fan of when fans boo their hometown player, when they boo somebody on their own team. I just don't really know what that accomplishes. You know, I'm not taking away the fans' rights to do that, because if you pay for a ticket, you know, you can go in there and cheer and boo for anybody that you want. So they have a right to do that. But that would not be good. If Mika Zibanejad starts really hearing it from Ranger fans, I don't think he's going to handle it very well. We've talked in the past about how this particular group of Ranger players, they do seem to be a little bit on the sensitive side. You know, there were countless examples of that over the past year or so. And certain guys, you know, you get booed by your own fans. It probably doesn't bother them as much. The last Ranger that I can remember really getting booed by Ranger fans was actually Marty St. Louis. And he turned things around in the playoffs. And then, of course, there was that situation where his mom passed away unexpectedly. And, you know, he came back strong with the Mother's Day goal and everything like that. And you know, the fans were cheering for him naturally before that even happened. And good for them. You got to be sadistic to boo somebody after that. But the bottom line is it doesn't happen very often. But if anybody on this Ranger team right now was to start hearing it from Ranger fans in Madison Square Garden, I think Mika would probably be the guy. But he can, of course, avoid all of this if he gets off to a better start this season. Act like he gives a damn and, you know, show it on the ice. That's going to go a long way for Mika Zibanejad, because everybody loves a redemption story. And there's one there for Mika, but it's up to him if he wants to tell it or not. So in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling here. I want to shift our attention to the best case scenarios when it comes to Mika Zibanejad, and we will do that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Whether you're playing a same-game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel will make it feel like you are part of the action. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for always supporting this podcast through thick and thin and all the ups and downs that we call New York Ranger hockey. Going forward, we're going to continue doing episodes just like this. More best and worst case scenarios for basically every single player on the New York Rangers. Definitely looking forward to that. As far as who we talk about in the next episode, maybe JT Miller. You know, I think Miller would be a good one. He's certainly an interesting player and somebody that was brought over to change the culture of this team a little bit. So we might talk about JT in the next one. Also, we've got a couple of more Ranger draft picks that we need to discuss from this year's class. So definitely looking forward to doing that as well. And anything else that the Rangers happen to do between now and the start of the preseason. But for right now, let's go ahead, keep the focus on Mika Zibanejad and some of the good things, the best case scenarios that could unfold for Mika Zibanejad this upcoming season. We'll start with one that I found, pretty interesting when it happened. And that is the idea that Mika could get a boost from David Quinn being back. Now, granted, Quinn is now an assistant coach. He was previously the Rangers head coach. He will now be an assistant for Mike Sullivan. But this was an intriguing one for me because back when David Quinn got fired, he spent 3 years as Ranger coach, and then he was out the door. Not too many players on the New York Rangers, Mika Zibanejad included, really went to bat for him when it came to the exit interviews with the media. There were some generic comments, sure, and some generic even compliments, I guess you could say. but nobody really said like, yeah, love Quinn and man, I'd skate through a brick wall for him and I really hope he's back next year. There was none of that, not even close. Mika Zibanejad additionally did not go there. He did not give Quinn that kind of praise. That doesn't mean that it can't work this time around. That doesn't mean that Mika Zibanejad doesn't want him back or wouldn't be able to benefit from having him back. Possibly what happened too when David Quinn was getting fired, it's very possible that all these players saw the writing on the wall. I mean, JD and Jeff Gorton had been fired, like a week or two before that, whatever it was. It became very, very obvious that the Rangers were going to go in a different direction and that David Quinn was not going to return for a fourth season as Ranger coach. So with that being the case, maybe Mika and the other veterans didn't really see the point in like really going to bat for David Quinn. But either way, they clearly did not do that. However, maybe it's a situation where you just don't know what you have until it's gone. Maybe Mika Zibanejad misses David Quinn, even from like a mental perspective. Maybe Quinn was good for Mika's psyche. Maybe Quinn knew how to push Mika's buttons and get him to go out there and be the best version of himself. And when you look at the numbers here, you go back to David Quinn's first season as Rangers head coach, that's when Mika Zibanejad truly broke out in the NHL. This despite the fact that he played parts of 5 seasons with Ottawa and 2 seasons with the Rangers before this. But this first season, the first season that Quinn was there, Mika ended up with 74 points in 82 games. His previous career high in points was only 51. So that was a true breakout. And the following year was even better because he didn't get 74 points. He got 75 points, and he did it in just 57 games. So obviously, in terms of points per game, his production skyrocketed at that point. Mika also had some really good seasons after David Quinn was here. The 2 years with Gerard Gallant were very, very kind to Mika Zibanejad as well. But under Quinn, and I know Ranger fans have mixed feelings on Quinn, and we've talked about this in the past too, but under Quinn is when Mika Zibanejad reached a whole nother level. So, you know what? I've always been kind of impartial when it comes to who should be the assistant coaches of the Rangers or any team I root for. For me, the big thing is just let the head coach pick, his people. Get the people that he wants as the assistant coaches, and we'll just kind of roll with that. But Sullivan was obviously allowed to do that. He chose David Quinn, and potentially Mika Zibanejad will benefit from Quinn as much or more than any other player on this Ranger team. We'll see how it all unfolds. And look, Mika's got to do the work. It doesn't matter if Quinn's coaching him or Sullivan or Gallant or Laviolette or anybody else. Mika's got to do the work himself. But it does seem like Mika, really excelled when David Quinn was behind the bench for the Rangers. And we'll see if history can repeat itself with Quinn now as an assistant coach. Another best case scenario, Mika Zibanejad actually benefits from Chris Kreider being traded. These two struggled last season a lot. I think that's putting it very mildly. They almost always were on the same line. I mean, eventually Laviolette started shifting the lines around, but I'll use the analogy that a lot of you guys have used as well when it comes to what happened last season. It was basically like moving around the furniture on the Titanic. That it served about as much of a purpose as doing that would have. And look, it just didn't work. And I think there's times in sports, I've talked about this in the past too, but I'll repeat it here, where you can almost get too comfortable with some of your teammates. Now, on one hand, you want to have chemistry. You want to have camaraderie. You want these guys to be friendly. You want them to care about each other and have each other's backs on and off the ice. And that's all well and good. And I completely understand that. But I think there's times where everybody just gets a little too familiar. Everybody gets a little too casual. Everybody gets almost even a little bit too friendly. And it gets to a point where there's nobody to really hold you in check. There's nobody to hold you accountable. And you kind of see the result of that this past season. I mean, say what you will about Jacob Trouba, and a lot of us did and have. But he was clearly the leader of this team. And this team was affected when all the Trouba trade rumors, and I know they have to get over it and whatnot, but Jacob Trouba was the leader. He was the guy steering the ship. He was the guy that was going to hold people accountable. And there was clearly a void in that regard last season in this Ranger locker room. Kreider and Mika, again, we don't see everything that goes on behind closed doors, but I have a very difficult time envisioning one of them kind of getting in the other one's face and going, yo, let's go. We got to pick it up. Again, everybody just got a little bit too friendly, too familiar with each other. So Mika, being away from Kreider, not having him in the locker room, maybe Kreider will benefit from it too. Kreider needed a change of scenery, it would certainly appear, and I think the Ducks are a pretty good landing spot for him. But Mika needs to pick things up next season, and it just felt like that pairing, almost on and off the ice, even as line mates, it had just kind of gone sour. It had gone south. These guys were not the same productive players that they were at other points in their Ranger career, especially when it comes to 5v5 play. And Now Mika gets a chance to play with two different players this upcoming season. I think one of them can, should, and will be JT Miller. We'll see how else the Rangers line up. Maybe Will Cooley is on that line too. But I think maybe in a best case scenario, Mika will benefit from some fresh blood, playing with some guys that he's not used to playing with. Just put him back on his toes a little bit. I think also in a best case scenario, and I already hinted at this a couple of times, in fact, but Mika will benefit tremendously from playing with JT Miller. We saw it this past season. JT Miller's first game back with the Rangers this past season was on February 1st. Listen to these splits for Mika Zibanejad before that happened and after that happened. Before February 1st, Mika Zibanejad had a grand total of 9 goals and 20 assists for a total of 29 points in 50 games. This despite never getting moved off of the top power play unit, mind you. There might have been like a game or two where they shuffled things around a little bit and broke up that top power play, but that never lasted. For the most part, same 5 players every single game. And despite all of that, 29 points in 50 games to start the season last year for Mika Zibanejad. Now we get to the JT Miller trade on February 1st. February 1st was his first game with the Rangers. So we'll include February 1st from that date and every game after that. We are talking about now a total for Mika Zibanejad of 11 goals and 22 assists for a total of 33 points in 32 games. He was also a +3. I should also mention, I think I might have forgotten to say this, before JT Miller got here, Mika was a -25. He had one of the worst plus minuses in the entire NHL. And again, that really turned around. He was basically back to being a point per game player, actually just north of a point per game player once JT Miller was reacquired. That cannot be ignored. And I think that's a whole bunch of reasons right there to keep Mika with JT Miller this upcoming season. Now, I realize that's not the only factor as far as why his Mika got better, the acquisition of JT Miller. You've got other factors, just the simple fact that Mika is typically a slow starter, and he typically does put up better numbers, down the stretch than he does in the early parts of the season. So there's that to consider as well. You could also throw out the idea that Mika, in the 32 games that JT Miller was here with the Rangers, Mika wasn't necessarily with JT Miller for every minute of every single game, but for the most part, yeah, Mika Zibanejad was on JT Miller's line. So again, I don't think this can be ignored, and I think in a best case scenario, the reacquisition of JT Miller will continue to pay huge dividends for Mika Zibanejad. And now he's got a whole season with him. He's got a chance to, I think there was some overlap there. I think they were very briefly teammates when they were on the Rangers. I would have to double check that. But, he had a chance to get JT Miller back and play with him, this time around. But now he's got a whole offseason. He's got training camp. He's got the preseason. They can figure it out together. And hopefully it leads to, something of a renaissance for Mika Zibanejad. Another best case scenario. Okay, so this is kind of an A and B situation. You'll understand in a second. One of two things happens here for Mika Zibanejad this upcoming season. Mika either rediscovers his one-timer or he abandons it completely. One or the other. He's got 5 games. I'm usually very patient or more patient at least than I think a lot of other Ranger fans, other Ranger podcasters, whatever it might be. I'm running out of patience with this. I am so done with watching Mika Zibanejad wind back for a one-timer and just completely shank it, miss the net by like 6 or 7 feet, break his stick. I joked during a rough stretch for the Rangers last season that when Mika Zibanejad is winding back to attempt a one-timer, that he has a better chance of breaking his stick than he does of scoring, or potentially even putting the shot on net. That's not a good ratio. So in a best case scenario, he can kind of rediscover the touch there. That's something else that I think he should be working on this offseason, and he'll find the scoring touch when it comes to his one-timer again. But if that doesn't happen, and if it doesn't happen quickly, then it's time to go to a plan B. Try literally anything else. We saw a situation last year. It was getting, I think, kind of late in the season. Don't remember who it was against or anything like that. But there was a situation where Mika Zibanejad was fed what you thought was going to be a one-timer. He was, winding back and in position, and, oh, great, here we go. He's going to miss the net by 10 feet again, right? Well, no, he didn't do that at all. He actually faked the one-timer. He had his stick back. He put his stick back down on the ice. He moved quickly to his right, kind of toward the center of the ice, and then he snapped off a really quick wrist shot, and he scored. And it was like, okay, it's nice to know that he can at least try something different every once in a while. I think that's a move that maybe he should go to sometimes this season, because opposing teams, man, they're used to seeing Mika wind back and blast when it comes to that one-timer situation. If he can add that wrinkle into his game a little bit more often, fake the one-timer, stick handle really quick, take a wrist shot and score, I mean, hey, let's give it a shot, right? Anything would be better than what we saw last season. And it wasn't all Mika's fault, but you look at the Ranger power play and how much of a mess that was last year. Part of the reason not all of the reason, but part of the reason that it was a mess last season is because the whole thing runs through Mika Zibanejad taking one-timers. So you continue to rely on a play that does not work, that is not working, that's showing no signs of getting better. So again, Mika's got, I'm giving him 5 games. That's it. He's got to at least make us believe that he has a chance to score on a one-timer. And if he can't at least do that, then it's time to go to something else. It's time for a plan B, abandon the one-timer, and start trying to help your team, in a different way. But in just a second, got to keep everything rolling. I'm going to get to basically a verdict, a player outlook for this upcoming season. Just talk about what Mika Zibanejad is going to bring to the table, how they're going to use him, maybe a prediction or two as well. We'll get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers with basically, some final thoughts on Mika Zibanejad, a verdict for, what we're expecting this upcoming season. Here's a big thing for me. This is something that Mika Zibanejad must do. And we did touch on this briefly not too long ago. He must avoid a way to find a way, to avoid a slow start to this upcoming season. The Rangers were terrible last season. Let's just call it like it is. That's a fact. They were awful. And part of the problem was so many players got off to such bad starts and they never really got it going again. I mean, they would pick it up every here and there, every once in a while. The Rangers as a whole, they had a couple of good stretches last year, but it was few and far between. And that can't happen this season. They have to hit the ground running. They have 3 games to start this season. It's against the Penguins, the Sabres, and the Penguins again. It's got to start right there because the schedule gets much more difficult immediately after that. The Rangers need something big from Mika Zibanejad early in the season. And if we're in a situation where Mika Zibanejad comes out next season, the season starts, and he looks like he's going at half speed, he doesn't look like he's playing with any fire or any passion, he looks just kind of lethargic. If we get those kind of like sad puppy dog answers after games, the way that we've gotten in other seasons when things aren't going well for the Rangers, then fans are not going to be happy. I'm not going to be happy. You're not going to be happy. Ranger fans right now are down on Mika Zibanejad. There's maybe once or twice in today's episode here where I've been a little bit tough on Mika. Man, that is nothing compared to the kind of things you see said about him on social media. And certain things definitely do cross the line from certain people. But as far as if you're just critiquing his game, his hockey game, any criticism of Mika Zibanejad's hockey game last season, when it comes to the sport of hockey alone and nothing else, I didn't see one that I thought was like out of line or too extreme or being unfair to Mika Zibanejad. He really did struggle that much at the beginning of last season. So we absolutely need a better start from Mika Zibanejad this upcoming season. The Rangers in general need to hit the ground running. Mika Zibanejad, more so than any other player on this New York Ranger team, needs to hit the ground running next season, needs to get us excited, needs to get us believing that this is the Mika Zibanejad that we all knew and loved for, a good chunk of his Ranger career up until, it depends where you draw the line, but this past season was really the only one that I could look at it and say, okay, what we're getting from Mika Zibanejad is completely unacceptable. And he's got to bounce back from that. Not too big on like legacy talk and whatnot, but in some ways, yeah, Mika Zibanejad's legacy is on the line based on what he does going forward. This guy's another 5 years on his contract, so he's going to be here for a while. He's got the full no-move clause with it, which moves me into the next thing that I wanted to talk about here. I realize there are a lot of Ranger fans who are out there, who are listening to this, who are watching this, whatever the case might be. Nothing would make you happier than the Rangers trading Mika Zibanejad, even if it's a glorified salary dump, because I'm sure your logic would probably be that, okay, well, if we move him in any sort of way, if we get him off of this team, that's $8.5 million more that we have in cap space, probably for next offseason. This year's offseason is pretty much over in terms of free agent signings, other than maybe, a small signing here or there. But it would obviously give the Rangers more flexibility. Here's the thing, though. He's got a full no-move clause. And I understand people are unhappy about that. I understand that people think that the Rangers shouldn't be handing them out like Halloween candy. I get it. But he's under no obligation to waive that. That's in his contract. It's his right. He's got 5 years left, $8.5 million. The full no-move clause that he has will last up until the final week before the trade deadline of the final year of his contract. And even then, he can block a trade to 21 different teams. So I hate to break this to everybody, but Mika Zibanejad's not going anywhere. Even if he was ready and willing and happy to waive his no move clause, which by all accounts, it seems like it's the exact opposite of that. Like he has no plans on going anywhere. But even if he was like even eager to waive his no move clause, I don't think too many teams are going to be lining up to pick up Mika Zibanejad for the next 5 years, $8.5 million per season based on the season that he just had, right? I mean, come on. Would you want the Rangers to do that if he was on some other team and they were trying to trade him? Probably not. It's no different for any other team in the NHL. So I get it. I understand the sentiment that people would rather this team move on. And if it was doable, if the Rangers could benefit from trading Mika Zibanejad, I mean, I'd be on board too. But it's not doable, at least not the way that things stand as of now. And unless there's something going on behind the scenes that we're just not aware of, and Mika actually would welcome a trade, and there's a team that wants him, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be happening. Doesn't seem like it's going to be in the cards. So I understand that sentiment from Ranger fans. My plan for this upcoming season, if it's up to me, which clearly it's not, the Rangers have not asked for my opinion, but it would be to attach him at the hip to JT Miller. And I know that does weaken your depth, your center depth, because now you have to have Brodzinski or Parsonen playing in a top 9 role at center, or maybe a mystery candidate that we're not really thinking of right now playing at center. But I got to get what I can out of Mika Zibanejad. And with Mika, it shouldn't come down to him having to play with this player or with that player. He's supposed to be the guy that elevates other people, right? He's not supposed to be the guy that needs to be elevated. So it's unfortunate, but that's what I would do. I would play him with JT Miller and just hope for the best. Hopefully Brodzinski or Parsonen can hold it down at third line center. Is this a perfect plan? Absolutely not. But it's the best that I can come up with when you consider the fact that Mika Zibanejad is going to be here and they have to figure out a way to get the most out of him. And the fact that he did play infinitely better. It wasn't perfect, but he played infinitely better with JT Miller than he did before JT Miller got here with the Rangers, before that trade was executed in early February. So we'll see what happens. You know what? Clean slate. I'm kind of over the shock and the anger of last season. I am starting to look forward to this upcoming season, at least as much as you can be all of those things. You know, I don't know if I'll ever really forget what happened this past season, but eventually we got to move forward here. And let's see if some of these guys can bounce back. And I don't think there's probably not any Ranger on this team that needs to bounce back more so than Mika Zibanejad. So I figure we'll call it there. One more thing I want to mention real quick, actually. The power play. Mika Zibanejad should not be guaranteed a spot on the top power play unit. There's going to be a lot of competition this year. You look at how bad the Ranger power play was this past season. You know what? Clean slate there as well. Open competition. You want a spot on the top power play unit, you go out and you get it. There's a lot of competition, like I mentioned. Mika, JT, Panarin, Fox, Trocheck, Lafreniere, Cooley, maybe one of the young forwards as well. They could all end up there. It's at least possible. But Mika shouldn't be just handed it to him. He's got to go out and earn it. But we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well @jchick17, and definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.